What happens when a routine suburban power trip collides with the highest levels of the federal government? It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon, but when two officers decided to handcuff a black woman for disorderly conduct, they had no idea they just arrested their boss's boss. Nadia Hale was not having a glamorous afternoon. She was usually draped in a tailored charcoal blazer, power walking through the marble corridors of the Robert F. Kennedy Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C. As a senior litigator in the Civil Rights Division, her weekdays were a blur of federal injunctions, grand jury subpoenas, and dismantling systemic constitutional violations. She was brilliant, relentless, and arguably one of the most formidable attorneys on the East Coast. But today, Nadia was off the clock. She wore a faded Georgetown law hoodie, a pair of worn-in yoga pants, and mud-scuffed sneakers. She was standing in the driveway of a stunning two-story colonial home in Alexandria, Virginia. The neighborhood, Oakbrook Estates, was a manicured enclave of wealth characterized by perfectly trimmed hedges, sprawling oak trees, and neighbors who knew everyone's business. Nadia had just closed on the property. It was her dream home, a quiet sanctuary away from the brutal, high-stakes environment of federal court. She was waiting for her contractor, a man named Theo, to arrive and give her a quote on renovating the wraparound porch. Because the house was still entirely empty and she hadn't fully moved in, Nadia was walking the perimeter, taking measurements with a yellow tape measure, occasionally jotting down numbers in a small leather notebook. Across the street, the curtains of a bay window twitched. Marjorie Ellsworth, a retired real estate agent who had appointed herself the unofficial captain of the neighborhood watch, was peering through the blinds. Marjorie didn't recognize the woman pacing around the old Whitman property. The Whitmans had moved out, and to Marjorie's knowledge, the house was vacant. What Marjorie saw was a black woman in sweatpants walking around $1 million property looking into the ground floor windows. Instead of walking across the street to introduce herself or simply minding her own business, Marjorie picked up her phone and dialed the local police precinct's non-emergency line. She reported a suspicious individual casing a vacant home, adding that the person was prowling and acting defensively. A short while later, the quiet autumn air was shattered by the crunch of heavy tires on gravel. A black and white Alexandria police cruiser pulled up squarely blocking Nadia's silver sedan, which was parked legally on the street. Nadia looked up from her notebook. She watched as two officers stepped out of the vehicle. Officer Blake Hensley was a man whose posture radiated a desperate need for authority. His partner, Officer Reed Callahan, was older, looking slightly bored as he adjusted his duty belt. "Afternoon," Officer Hensley called out, his hand resting casually but intentionally near his sidearm. He closed the distance between the cruiser and the driveway, stepping onto Nadia's property without hesitation. "Good afternoon, officers," Nadia replied, keeping her voice even and polite. She let the tape measure retract with a sharp snap. "Can I help you?" "We got a call about a suspicious person trespassing on this property," Hensley said, stopping about 4 feet away from her. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her faded hoodie. "What's your business here?" "I'm the homeowner," Nadia said simply. "I just closed on the house. I'm waiting for my contractor." Hensley exchanged a glance with Callahan. It was a look Nadia had seen 1,000 times in her career, a smirk of profound disbelief masquerading as procedural skepticism. "The homeowner," Hensley repeated slowly. "You bought this place." "I did," Nadia affirmed. She didn't offer a smile. She knew exactly where this was going, and as a constitutional lawyer, her internal radar was already pinging. "All right, well, if you're the homeowner, you won't mind showing us some identification," Hensley said, holding out a gloved hand. Nadia sighed softly. "My ID is inside my purse, which is locked inside my car." She pointed to the silver sedan parked on the street. "But frankly, officer, unless you suspect me of committing a crime, I have no legal obligation to provide you with identification on my own private property." Officer Hensley's jaw tightened. The casual demeanor evaporated, replaced by a rigid, defensive posture. "Ma'am, we're investigating a report of a burglary in progress. That gives me the right to identify you. Now, go to your car and get your ID." "A burglary in progress?" Nadia raised an eyebrow, her litigator taking the wheel. "I'm standing in broad daylight, holding a tape measure and a notebook. I am not attempting to enter the house forcefully. Under Terry versus Ohio, you need reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime is afoot to detain and demand identification. An anonymous phone call from a neighbor who doesn't recognize me doesn't meet that threshold." Officer Callahan, the older partner, blinked. He wasn't used to citizens citing Supreme Court case law with the crisp, effortless diction of a law professor. He took a half step forward, trying to de-escalate. "Look, ma'am, we're just doing our jobs. A neighbor called it in. If you just show us your ID, we can clear this up and get out of your hair." "Officer," Nadia said, turning her sharp gaze to Callahan, I appreciate that you are responding to a dispatch, but I am telling you as a matter of law that I am on my own property and I am not legally required to produce papers simply because a neighbor made an unfounded assumption based on my appearance. Hensley stepped closer, closing the gap to an uncomfortably intimate distance. Listen to me very carefully. I don't care what you think you know about the law. You are being uncooperative. You are causing a disturbance. Now you are going to get your ID or I am going to detain you. Nadia didn't flinch. She looked Hensley directly in the eyes. Are you giving me a lawful order, officer? I am. And if I refuse an unlawful search, you plan to arrest me. I will arrest you for disorderly conduct and obstructing an investigation. Hensley snapped, his face flushing red. Nadia's mind worked at lightning speed. She could easily walk to the car, grab her driver's license, and end this. She could even pull out her gold-embossed Department of Justice badge, flash it in his face, and watch the color drain from his cheeks. But a darker, more righteous anger was brewing in her chest. How many people, she thought, didn't have a DOJ badge? How many kids from her old neighborhood in Baltimore had been backed against a wall by a cop like Hensley, intimidated into giving up their Fourth Amendment rights just to avoid a pair of handcuffs? She made a decision. She wasn't just Nadia Hale, homeowner, right now. She was Nadia Hale, civil rights watchdog, and she was going to let Officer Blake Hensley dig his own grave. I decline your request, Nadia said calmly. I am not providing identification. If you feel you have probable cause to arrest me, you may proceed. Otherwise, I would like you to step off my property. For a grueling stretch of time, nobody moved. The autumn breeze rustled the oak leaves above them. Across the street, Marjorie Ellsworth had stepped fully out onto her front porch, her arms crossed, watching the spectacle with a look of grim satisfaction. Officer Hensley let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. All right, have it your way. Before Officer Callahan could intervene, Hensley lunged forward. He grabbed Nadia's left wrist, twisting it sharply behind her back. Nadia gasped more from the shock of the physical contact than the pain. You are touching me without my consent. You are initiating a false arrest, she stated clearly, her voice loud enough for the neighborhood to hear, but entirely devoid of panic. Stop resisting, Hensley barked, pushing her slightly forward against the hood of her own car. I am completely compliant, Nadia replied, keeping her body entirely limp and relaxed. I am not pulling away. I am not raising my voice. Please note for your body camera that I am perfectly still. Callahan hurried over, looking incredibly anxious. Blake, hey, let's just... Cuff her, Reed, Hensley ordered, his adrenaline clearly spiking. She's refusing to identify. She's obstructing. Give me your cuffs. Callahan hesitated, but the ingrained brotherhood of the badge took over. He unclipped the steel handcuffs from his belt and handed them over. Click, click. The cold metal clamped down on Nadia's wrists. The reality of the situation washed over her. She was a senior federal prosecutor. She had personally drafted consent decrees that overhauled entire corrupt police departments. She had argued before federal appellate judges. And now she was being handcuffed against the hood of a sedan in her own driveway because she refused to bow to a bruised ego. You are under arrest for disorderly conduct and obstruction of justice, Hensley recited, his voice dripping with triumphant authority. He patted down her pockets, finding nothing but her car keys, which he tossed onto the hood of the car. Officer Hensley, Nadia said, reading his name tag, and Officer Callahan, I want to be very clear. I am memorizing your badge numbers. I am asserting my right to remain silent, and I will not answer any further questions without an attorney present. You're going to need one, Hensley sneered. He grabbed her by the bicep, guiding her forcefully toward the back of the cruiser. As they walked down the driveway, Nadia kept her head held high. She saw Marjorie Ellsworth watching from the opposite sidewalk, looking utterly vindicated. Several other neighbors had stepped out of their houses to watch the commotion. It was the ultimate suburban nightmare, being paraded in handcuffs in front of the people you were supposed to live next to for years to come. But Nadia didn't feel humiliation. She felt absolute, ice-cold clarity. Hensley pushed her down into the back of the cruiser. The plastic seat was hard and uncomfortable. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing her in the claustrophobic, cage-like backseat. Through the plexiglass divider, she watched Hensley and Callahan climb into the front. Unbelievable, Hensley muttered, starting the engine. These people think they can read one article online and suddenly they're legal scholars. I don't know, man, Callahan said quietly, adjusting the rearview mirror to glance back at Nadia. She didn't seem crazy. Maybe she really did buy the house. Then she should have showed her ID like a normal person, Hensley retorted, putting the car in drive. You don't get to mouth off to a badge and walk away. She's going to spend a few hours in holding and maybe she'll learn some respect. The drive to the precinct took some time. Nadia sat in silence, staring out the window as the scenic suburban streets gave way to the concrete and glass of the municipal district. She was mentally drafting the Title 42 Section 1983 civil rights lawsuit. She was outlining the excessive force complaint. She was already anticipating the moment she would depose Officer Hensley under oath. She wasn't just going to sue him, she was going to make an example out of him. The cruiser pulled into the secure sally port of the Alexandria Police Department. The heavy garage doors rolled down behind them. Hensley opened the back door and pulled Nadia out by the arm, marching her through the double doors into the booking area. The precinct was bustling. Phones were ringing. Officers were typing away at heavy keyboards, and the smell of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner hung in the air. At the elevated front desk sat Sergeant Elias Crow, a veteran of the force with graying hair and a tired expression. He looked down from his computer monitor as Hensley marched Nadia to the booking counter. "What do we have, Hensley?" Sergeant Crow asked, stifling a yawn. "Refusal to identify, obstruction, and disorderly conduct, Sarge," Hensley said proudly. "Got a call about a prowler in Oakbrook Estates. Found her casing the old Whitman place. Refused to provide ID. Started getting combative and quoting fake law." Sergeant Crow looked at Nadia. He noted the Georgetown law hoodie, the calm posture, and the fact that she wasn't shouting, crying, or begging, the three standard reactions of someone sitting in handcuffs. "Ma'am," Sergeant Crow said, his tone neutral, "do you have a name?" Nadia looked at the sergeant. The game of chicken was officially over. It was time to introduce herself. "My name is Nadia Hale," she said, her voice echoing clearly across the booking room. "I am a senior civil rights litigator for the United States Department of Justice. My federal identification and badge are in my wallet inside my vehicle, which your officers illegally abandoned at my home. And Sergeant, you have only a short time to take these handcuffs off me before I personally ensure this precinct is subjected to a federal civil rights audit." The typing in the room suddenly stopped. Sergeant Crow froze, his pen hovering over the booking sheet. Officer Hensley's proud smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The silence in the booking area was deafening. The rhythmic clacking of keyboards ceased entirely. A young desk officer, holding a stack of file folders, froze mid-step. The only sound left in the room was the low electric hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. Sergeant Elias Crow stared at the woman in the faded Georgetown law hoodie. He'd been a cop for a long time. He had a sixth sense for bluffers, sovereign citizens, and people trying to talk their way out of a holding cell. The woman standing before him, radiating an icy, unflinching authority, was not bluffing. "Hensley," Sergeant Crow said, his voice dropping an octave, losing all of its previous boredom, "take the cuffs off now." Officer Hensley blinked, his face flushing with a mix of confusion and stubborn pride. "Sarge, come on. She's lying. She's just a squatter who knows some legal jargon. She refused a lawful order." "I said take the cuffs off her, Hensley," Crow barked, standing up from his desk. His chair rolled backward, slamming into a filing cabinet. "Do it before I strip you of your badge right here in the lobby." Officer Callahan, who had been lingering near the doorway, practically sprinted over. Pushing Hensley aside, Callahan fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking visibly. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Callahan whispered as he unlocked the steel bracelets. "I told him we should just talk to you." The cuffs fell away with a heavy clatter. Nadia brought her arms forward, slowly rubbing her wrists where the metal had pressed into her skin. She didn't look at Callahan. She kept her eyes locked on Sergeant Crow. "Sergeant, I want my keys," Nadia said, holding out her hand. Crow glared at Hensley, who slowly reached into his pocket and placed the car keys onto the booking counter. "Officer Callahan," Nadia continued, her voice echoing in the quiet room, "you are going to drive back to my property. You will unlock my vehicle, retrieve my black leather tote bag from the passenger seat, and bring it directly back to me. If my neighbor, Marjorie Ellsworth, is still standing on the sidewalk, you will inform her that she has filed a false police report and that she will be hearing from my legal counsel." Callahan looked to his sergeant for approval. Crow gave a sharp, frantic nod. "Go. Take the cruiser. Use the lights." As Callahan bolted out the double doors, Sergeant Crow hurried around the counter. He gestured nervously toward a glass-walled conference room down the hall. "Miss Hale, please, let's step into my office. I'll get you some water, some coffee. Let's sit down and figure this out." "I'm not going anywhere with you, Sergeant," Nadia replied, standing her ground in the center of the booking area. "I am waiting right here in the lobby until my federal credentials arrive. Then I am calling your precinct captain, and then I am calling the inspector general." Hensley, unable to read the room or control his bruised ego, crossed his arms. "You can call whoever you want. You still broke the law. You were obstructing." "Officer Hensley," Nadia said, turning her piercing gaze onto him. It was the same look she used to dismantle hostile witnesses in federal court. "Under the Virginia Code, obstruction of justice requires force, threats, or a physical attempt to impede an officer. Refusing to identify oneself does not constitute obstruction unless an actual arrest has been made for a separate crime. Furthermore, under the Fourth Amendment, you lacked reasonable suspicion to detain me. She stepped closer to him. Hensley instinctively took a half step back. You didn't arrest me because I broke the law, Nadia continued, her voice perfectly level but sharp as glass. You arrested me because I bruised your ego. You weaponized your badge to punish a black woman who dared to tell you no on her own property. A short while later, the precinct doors flew open. Officer Callahan rushed in, breathless, clutching a sleek black leather tote bag. He practically handed it to Nadia like an offering. Nadia unzipped the bag. She pulled out a slim navy blue leather wallet and flipped it open. A heavy, gold-enameled badge caught the fluorescent light, resting perfectly next to her Department of Justice identification card. It clearly read, Nadia Hale, Senior Litigator, Civil Rights Division. Sergeant Crow closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering exhale. He knew exactly what the Civil Rights Division did. They were the people who put rogue cops in federal prison. Ms. Hale, a new, breathless voice called out from the hallway. Captain Grant Holloway, the precinct commander, hurried into the lobby. He had clearly been pulled out of a meeting. His tie was askew, and a sheen of sweat coated his forehead. Sergeant Crow had managed to send a panic text to the brass while Callahan was retrieving the bag. Ms. Hale, I am Captain Holloway, he said, extending a hand that Nadia pointedly ignored. He quickly lowered it. I cannot express how profoundly sorry I am for this misunderstanding. This is a complete failure of protocol. You are completely free to go. All charges are dropped, and the arrest record will be expunged immediately. It's not a misunderstanding, Captain, Nadia corrected him. A misunderstanding is getting an address wrong, handcuffing a citizen without probable cause, initiating a false arrest, and violating their civil rights is a crime. And you cannot just expunge an unconstitutional arrest to make it go away. Ms. Hale, please, Holloway pleaded, lowering his voice in a desperate attempt at damage control. Officer Hensley is a young cop. He made a tactical error. We will handle this internally. I assure you, he will face disciplinary action. But let's not blow this out of proportion. You know how the media gets with these things. Nadia looked at the captain, then at Sergeant Crow, and finally at Officer Hensley, who was now pale, finally grasping the magnitude of the career-ending crater he had just stepped into. I am a federal prosecutor, Captain, Nadia said smoothly, slinging her tote bag over her shoulder. My entire career is built on blowing unconstitutional police conduct completely out of proportion. I strongly suggest you retain municipal counsel. Have a pleasant afternoon. Without waiting for a response, Nadia turned on her heel and walked out of the precinct, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind her. The fallout was not immediate. It was surgical, methodical, and devastating. Nadia didn't go to the media. She didn't post a viral video or rant on social media. She went back to her beautiful new house, poured herself a glass of Cabernet, and booted up her encrypted DOJ laptop. The following day, the Alexandria Police Department received a preservation order from the United States Department of Justice legally mandating the immediate securing of all body-worn camera footage, dispatch logs, and internal communications related to her arrest. Shortly after, Nadia filed a massive civil lawsuit against Officer Blake Hensley, the Alexandria Police Department, and the City of Alexandria. She alleged false arrest, excessive force, and a deprivation of her civil rights under 18 U.S.C. to Section 242. But Nadia didn't stop there. Because she was the plaintiff, she couldn't prosecute the criminal case herself. However, her colleagues in the Civil Rights Division were more than happy to take the reins. A federal probe was launched into the precinct. When the FBI began digging into Officer Hensley's personnel file, they uncovered a horrifying, yet entirely unsurprising pattern. Hensley had multiple prior complaints filed against him by minority residents in Oakbrook Estates and surrounding affluent neighborhoods. The complaints were nearly identical: detaining individuals without cause, aggressive posturing, and initiating arrests for disorderly conduct when citizens legally questioned his authority. Every single complaint had been buried by Sergeant Crow and Captain Holloway under the guise of internal discipline. Sometime later, Nadia sat in a pristine oak-paneled conference room in downtown D.C. for the civil depositions. Across the long table sat Officer Blake Hensley. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He wore an ill-fitting gray suit, and he looked exhausted. Beside him sat the city's defense attorney, looking deeply uncomfortable. Officer Hensley, Nadia's private attorney began, sliding a printed transcript across the table. On the day of the incident, you stated, "These people think they can read one article online, and suddenly they're legal scholars." To whom were you referring when you said "these people"? Hensley shifted in his seat, wiping his sweaty palms on his slacks. I just meant citizens, people who don't know police work. Nadia leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked onto his. Did you mean black citizens? Officer Hensley? Her attorney pressed. The same demographic represented in 100% of your excessive force complaints. Objection, badgering. The city's lawyer mumbled weakly. Hensley swallowed hard. No, I didn't mean that. Officer Hensley, Nadia spoke up, her voice slicing through the tension in the room. When you told me that I was going to need an attorney, did it occur to you that perhaps you should have reviewed the basic tenets of the Fourth Amendment before putting your hands on someone who lives and breathes it? You didn't go? Hensley couldn't hold her gaze. He looked down at his hands. I was just responding to a dispatch, he whispered. You were responding to your ego, Nadia corrected quietly. The city settled the civil lawsuit a short while later for an undisclosed seven-figure sum, which Nadia promptly donated to a legal defense fund for marginalized youth in Virginia. As part of the settlement, Officer Blake Hensley was forced to resign and surrender his law enforcement certification permanently. He would never wear a badge again. Captain Holloway was forced into early retirement, and the entire Alexandria Police Department was placed under a federal consent decree mandating sweeping reforms, implicit bias training, and independent oversight regarding their stop and identify procedures. And then there was Marjorie Ellsworth. Nadia hadn't forgotten the neighborhood watch captain. While she couldn't throw Marjorie in jail, she could certainly hold her accountable. Nadia filed a civil tort against Marjorie for intentional infliction of emotional distress and filing a false police report. When the process server handed the lawsuit to Marjorie on her front porch, the older woman burst into tears. She eventually settled out of court, paying a hefty sum and, more importantly, issuing a forced public apology in the local community newsletter, admitting she had weaponized the police out of prejudice. Marjorie moved out of Oakbrook Estates sometime later, unable to face the neighborhood whispers. A long while after the incident, it was another quiet afternoon in Alexandria. Nadia Hale stood on her newly renovated, magnificent wraparound porch. She wore a comfortable sweater and held a steaming mug of black coffee. The neighborhood was peaceful. The oak trees were beginning to shed their golden leaves. A sleek police cruiser slowly drove down the street on routine patrol. As it approached Nadia's house, the driver, a newly trained officer who had just completed the department's mandated constitutional law seminar, slowed down. He rolled down his window and offered a polite, respectful wave. Nadia took a sip of her coffee and waved back. Justice wasn't just something she argued for in federal court anymore. It was something she had built right here in her own front yard. What a massive reality check. It just goes to show that you never truly know who you're dealing with. And abusing your power can come back to destroy your career in the blink of an eye. What did you think of Nadia's masterclass in keeping calm under pressure? Let us know in the comments below. If you love this story, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with your friends and subscribe for more real-life drama and insane plot twists.